Hey guys, welcome back to another weekly horoscope. Today we're going to be looking at the astrology of September 14th through the 20th of 2021. My name's David, and I'm your astrologer from HC Astrology. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all your support, liking, commenting, and subscribing. It all means a lot to me and goes a very long way. I also want to say, if you know anyone who would benefit from my weekly astrology horoscopes and anyone who'd be interested in these kinds of things, please feel free to share my videos with anyone in your circles. So as you can see, I'm still not back in my usual studio, so I'm still traveling. So I'm probably not going to be doing blog posts as usual. I'm going to try and keep doing these weekly videos. If I can't make it next week, please don't be upset. So, but I'm still doing consultations. And if you'd like to book a consultation with me, just head over to my website and use the scheduler system. All the information is in the description box. All right, so let's open up the transits for this week. Get that out there. Probably not going to annotate much this week. I find it's a bit distracting. But this week is, so here we can see the astrology. And this week is going to probably bring some additional challenges, especially to relationships, as well as our efforts or missions we're on as it comes to Mars, since Mars on the 15th, so on Wednesday, is moving, basically Tuesday into Wednesday, will ingress Libra and into its sign of antithesis, or what is called exile. So try to really understand that this is more of a maturing week. There will be definitely difficulties that require significant degree of tolerance and patience. I'd suggest try to lean into it. Easy does it, because the beginning of this week will be different than the end of this week. You can see we got that moon trine Mercury here, and also moon trine Venus. And then also with the moon's ingress into Pisces, we're getting ready for that full moon that basically opens up next week. And so I think the beginning of this week is pretty different in terms of how we need to adjust to the new situations and ways that things are going to be changing and forming from this point forward. It may definitely be difficult in that adjustment, but there will be a place for things to unfold more smoothly later. And we'll get our turn in line, so to speak, if we're able to practice, like I said, patience. Anyway, so I'm kind of opening up where, it's Monday right now. It's the 13th of September. And there's that first quarter moon. I don't have it on the list here, but there's the first quarter moon today. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But then the first thing we get is that sun opposite Neptune on the 14th, so on Tuesday. And then Mars will ingress Libra basically the next day, like that day into the next day, basically. And then, yeah, that Venus square Saturn, now that Venus is in Scorpio. So let's kind of break each thing down and go into it. I am starting here on the 13th, but I'll move into the 14th. Let's just move into the 14th. Okay. So, like I said, we just had that first quarter moon while the moon's been transiting through Sagittarius. And so there's something about this like break maybe from the dream, the story, the circumstances, not being on the same page exactly when the moon's going to square the sun, which would have happened already on Monday. And we're seeing the first challenges to an initiated plan, intentions, new beginnings that would have begun maybe the week before with that new moon in Virgo. And now we're starting to see some of the challenges maybe of what that new beginning meant, or what that new start to the story is about. And we have to push through if we want to see that go forward. It's the conflict, crisis in action. So there could be seeing challenges, setbacks, struggles, and this is, of course, clashing with the plot line and the environment. in which we're inhabiting. So where are we now versus what has the story been so far, and what do we need to do in order for that story to continue? Now, yesterday, or Monday, sorry, it also included the square to Neptune, which is kind of like a theme of what's going on during this new moon in general, since even though it wasn't exact in the opposition to Neptune, it was sign-based opposition to Neptune. So overall, this kind of confusion, an avoidance from problems on general, trying to figure out ways of scheming through that rather than dealing with them, and some letdowns of some kind. Anyway, so moving into Tuesday, I'm also I'm traveling now through Toronto, Canada. So you can just adjust your time to wherever you are. Think of it like a world clock, but that's where I'm based right now, and that's where I'm gonna read the transits from, rather than from my usual location in Berlin, Germany. So the day opens up with that sextile of the moon to Jupiter. So then maybe, even though the day before was this challenge to overcome and meet with those frustrations of things not really going according to plan, or that the fantasy and the reality are not exactly lining up in a way that makes sense, I think the sextile to Jupiter gives a bit of extra hope and optimism that perhaps things will be okay, that we can still do things to reshape the plan as it is, and to realign to focus on the longer term plans in general, as opposed to maybe short term fantasies and pleasures. I think in general, best thing moving forward is to try and connect with that hopefulness, optimism, forgiveness, and tolerance of things, because things are going to be things might get challenging and very confusing, and there might, especially once Mars moves into Libra, our usual impulses to take action are not going to work as they usually do. So we have to learn to be patient. So let's move that forward, because the sun, even though, like, look at it, it's like we can look at the sun's 21 degrees, 34 minutes. It's basically in the opposition to Neptune. So, sun's going to perfect that opposition to Neptune, which is like, I kind of see this as like the foghorn attempting to guide ships in from sea. And there's this kind of urge to avoid bigger challenges, to bring light and clarity as much as possible to a pretty confusing, blinding wall of fog on some level. I was just in Newfoundland, Canada, so I witnessed like firsthand this kind of fog from the sea, and it's pretty intense. Like, you really can't see anything, but there's things out there, and you hear this big foghorns that come from the land, from the lighthouses, and this distance. And it's like this steady reminder that things are trying to continue to work and perform as normal, even though there was this incredibly thick and visceral wall of fog. And you can also think about this opposition too, right? So even though there's this intentionality to create clarity and understanding of things with the sun, and to really take things, bigger problems, and put them into pieces, being in Virgo, but then Neptune is over there, it's just this wall of fog. So this opposition is kind of pulling between these two forces, one that wants to clarify and illuminate so that we know what's going on, while the other wants to bring layer upon layer of confusion, uncertainty, that perhaps there's a rock there, or maybe it's just more sea, who knows. Your imaginations can run wild this week, especially. So, and I think especially since that new moon, it's like, we don't know what's going to happen next. So there's this kind of falling into a place where we're just like imagining things rather than actually just being where we are. And I think that's the challenge with this lunation cycle, is like, we have to try our best not to go way too far into the future where things we just don't understand are going to happen. Bring ourselves back to the present, because imaginations are running wild. We can let them run wild, but it doesn't make any sense, because what we need right now is clarity, right? So bring yourself back to the present. Remind yourself, what are you doing? Where are you? And that should help in terms of the day to day, which really is the only way to do this. So moving things forward, the moon then perfects that inferior square with Mars, who, now is So it's now within that 8-degree range to the sun, so it's combust under the sun, which means that Mars is already debilitated heading into Libra. Mars has no way of getting out of things as things that are going forward. It's as though our will to push is being dominated by the overarching story, the story of confusion. The spirit of motion that is propelling things forward with or without us. This is also about facing these challenges without that courage we typically have, and to be assertive when we really want to just check out maybe and enjoy this adventure maybe we're having, feeling very out of tune with the idea that in order for the story to go forward, we have to initiate things and put in our efforts in order for that story to actually get going. And with the moon square to Mars, it's likely that we are feeling too much about this. We're being a bit too sensitive, and we're sending our heads in this kind of spin that things are not going to go without some sort of conflict, maybe that maybe there isn't a conflict there, but we're thinking there will be. But that's just life. Maybe if there is a conflict, we can't do everything we want to do without facing some sort of opposition or frustration from others. And I think, the moon, that's the last aspect the moon's going to make in Sag. So even though there's this kind of hopefulness feeling, it's like maybe the problem will go away. Probably it won't. We have to do something about it. So going forward, then the moon then goes into Capricorn. So we get an energy shift as things become basically more serious, determined, enigmatic, mystical, as we abandon some of the material dilemmas faced in order to get to the goals we have set before ourselves since that new moon. This is traditionally the moon's antithetical sign or exile. Another term would be detriment. Regardless, the moon does not feel really accepted, understood, or belonging in Capricorn. So our emotions may be generally out of place during this moon's transits through Capricorn. This is a normal monthly thing, so it's not like something we're unfamiliar with. But as Mars, moves into Libra, and we get that square to Mercury, and then the square to Neptune, I think, or not the square to Neptune, but I think that those squares to Libra are going to pose some issues while the moon's going through Capricorn. So emotions are kind of out of place, which often is why when the moon goes through Capricorn, we have to put our heads down, get to work, focus on the goals, because that what we're feeling is not exactly in line with how things are going at this time. It's this contrast between inside world and outside world, which is why Capricorn can be quite a mystical place. Moon is gaining light too, right? So the moon is moving towards that full moon. It's going to trine the sun. And so things are becoming more active and goal-oriented, focusing on where Saturn is and what Saturn is doing in Aquarius, and becoming more concerned with this Aquarius story too, which is going to help us out once Moon gets into Aquarius, I think. As well as this Venus square that's applying to Saturn. We're really going to start to feel that. And through the whole week, perfects on Friday. So the moon goes forward and initially makes that sextile to Venus. So pretty good thing in general, which is a nice connection. The moon makes this connection to the planet of love and harmony before this kind of big shift of Mars moving into Libra. Venus is also in its sign of exile in Scorpio, so it's not exactly a place where Venus feels comfortable. There's definitely some insecurity, unsureness about the state of relationships and connections, that things are not going to work out, or that there is no connection to be had, or that our needs and desires are maybe not going to be met, or that we can't trust them because there does not seem to be a positive outcome for them on some level. And so I kind of see the moon's in Capricorn sextile Venus and Scorpio is like these two tempering forces trying to make an adjustment to this not so comfortable and not so pleasing moment in time. This is our feelings attempting to adjust to our sensations and desires so that we can at least get through the coming days and weeks with some semblance of stability in our psychological as well as physiological well-being. In a way that I kind of see this as both planets are in their exile. And I kind of see this as like that camaraderie between like two down and bottom drinking buddies in a way. This is like, the reason maybe some people become drinkers and go to local pubs day in, day out. They try to find that common place in this misery on some level to share that misery together. My problems are worse than your problems, this kind of thing. There's things not working out for a lot of people though, and this could be that moment of connecting with another who is down, because there's a chance to transcend things when we recognize that we are not suffering necessarily alone. I mean, that's not just, I'm not really saying in this, don't go out and go like hardcore drinking and find that drinking buddy. On the contrary, but perhaps this is a little adjustment that can be made in order to soothe the feelings that things in relationships are feeling unstable, chaotic, disintegrating, severing, possessive, skeptical with Venus in Scorpio. This is about maybe sharing with another that feelings that we are not the only ones in control, that in some level this is about surrender. That's kind of it for Tuesday. So let's move into Wednesday. Moon keeps going through Cap. And yeah, Mars moved into Libra. So this is kind of the biggest event of the week, which was basically going to be dragging out for the coming weeks, which is Mars in Libra. This is Mars's sign of exile, which means that we now have a total of 3 planets, a Moon, Venus, and Mars, in their respective signs of exile. And personally, I don't think that bodes terribly well for things to go smoothly, negotiations to be made without frustration, and for our emotions, our emotional needs to get met at this time. So don't expect that. Mars is this planet of action, division, cutting and severing, courage and valor. Mars wants to get in, get out with as minimal consequence as possible to get the job done, to face the problem head on, to bring about that abrupt and necessary change. But while Mars is in Libra, Venus' sign of balance, discernment, maintaining of image, and stepping away from problems rather than getting into them, then basically anything we try to do in this like Mars-like typical way is going to get caught up in all the nuances, dualities, comparing, and politeness of this Venus Libra sign. And Mars is going to get caught in this frustrating position, maybe of total paralysis by analysis. Mars can't do anything without fighting things out first or figuring things out first. And this does not really bode well for that kind of action. It means that sides need to be considered, and perhaps nothing gets done, or efforts go almost nowhere. So, just this paralysis by analysis. You're overthinking things, you're looking at things too much. And because of that, it doesn't go anywhere. You're having the same conversation over and over and again. And your typical way of getting out of that doesn't work because it could just make things worse. So this is like, I kind of see this as like trying to cut that piece of tape, or attempting to cut like the foil, like wrapping foil that you need to mend something or protect something or preserve something. And yet the scissors or tools you have to cut this material is just like horribly dull. And you end up with these pieces of tape stuck together that won't come apart. Or like, when you're trying to tear the tape and then you get these like weird like fragments of it, it drives me crazy. And so you can never get like a solid piece of tape. And or you get this like foil that keeps folding in on itself, just becoming useless waste. And that's very frustrating because I really don't like creating more garbage in this world. So yeah, that's how I see it. From my experience also from working in kitchens and cutting off and damaging parts of my hands over the years, there's nothing, and from studios and stuff like that, if you're going to use a saw, you need to use a sharp saw. If you're going to use a knife, you need to use a sharp knife. There's nothing more dangerous than working with a dull or non-functioning knife or tool or saw, and you're really setting yourself up to get hurt. That's why it's so important to sharpen your tools. Now, not to go totally down a negative spiral here, I think one of the positive things going on though is now that Venus and Mars are in each other's respective signs, we get that mutual reception. And so that's a mitigating factor in this whole thing. And it basically means that on some level, the two forces which are maybe not comfortable or belonging in places that they recognize, that they're recognizing instead that they're in one another, that they're in it with one another, and to try and at least do something about it, even though they don't want to, or they don't necessarily get along doing it. You know, it's kind of like, okay, well, we're in it together. We can't not be in this together. So this is not really a time for head-on fighting either, which is going to feel maybe antithetical to what our instincts are telling us. It's a time maybe to present ourselves in the best possible light that we can, and to frustratingly maybe take the position of tolerance over action, to think twice, say nothing. That's what a little bit of advice I recently learned. So there's judgment to be made right now, but it's not about us forcing things to work out and to fight for our position. Instead, it's a time to take a breath, recognize the impulse to take action, to let go, let those frustrations go. Even if we can't do it perfectly, it's okay. Just sit there, let it pass. This is just the ego attempting to take control during a period when control and action are things that doing necessarily work together, that don't necessarily work together right now. For control is something that comes from outside, and so we have to recognize and realize that constriction of control is just entangling us the more we try to wiggle and move. In a way, I see this as kind of recognizing that struggling in the quicksand only makes us sink deeper, faster. The best thing to do now is to sit in that uncomfort and wait for outside forces to throw you the rope you need to climb yourself out of an even deeper problem. And I believe that this will come too, since Mars is going to be trine to Saturn and Jupiter all through the rest of September and deep into October. There will be help, and it will come, but it's somehow not about us trying to force things and to use our typical efforts to cut through the problems to the core of it. Instead, it's about waiting, observing, and seeing how this is all playing out and allowing it to happen, even if it feels wrong and against our instinctual fears and impulses. It's time to try and leave our emotions at the door in a way, especially with the moon in Mars's exaltation sign of Capricorn. Getting too involved is not going to solve anything right now. Doesn't mean that that's not the way it's going to work forever. We have to get real right now, and we have to just get a grip. I think more than ever, we have to learn to allow for compassion to blossom, to open ourselves up to the possibility that the world does not revolve necessarily around us, and that we have to learn to forgive if we're going to live in a world where we're all in this together. Regardless of if we like it or not, we can function in a way that we can at least learn to accept that. So that's Mars in Libra. All right, let's move forward. Moon then makes that trine to Uranus. So perhaps there is something innovative or different that can help us to focus our attention onto something outside the box, or that is different way of doing things because that is the most supportive outlet at this time. This is doing exactly what we're typically used to. This is seeing that what we're typically used to doesn't really work. And so this is a time when maybe that opposite thing does work instead. And I think this is a chance to practice the opposite in a way. It's like an opportunity for that. Okay, and then kind of closing off the day, we get that square to Mercury. So yeah, if you've seen in my previous videos, whenever the moon squares Mercury, not such a great time to communicate something, to send out the message. It may not be heard, or it may not be well received in some level with a degree. It may instead be met with some degree of confrontation, combativeness, or irritability. Like I said, there's this big shift going on right now and how our efforts are going to be effective. And the square is of the nature of Mars, right? So Mars's efforts is now in a sign that doesn't work normal as the way it normally does. So we have to try things differently. And this initial square to Mercury from the moon, I think, is the first in a successive series of dynamic and energized tension building frictions that, if we're not careful, could lead us down a rabbit hole of not so pleasant and inflammatory conversations, exchanges, uses of technology on some kind of level, and actions based on our experiences or knowledge. So that's kind of it for Wednesday. So let's move into Thursday. All right. So right off the bat, on Thursday, it's kind of a relieving lunar day, I think. Things are going as they should, going as though they are going now that the bigger changes have occurred. This is like feeling it out from this point forward, kind of. So before the moon makes that trine to the sun, it's going to sextile with Neptune. And I feel like this is like being exposed to the dream that reveals something in the field of fog, that perhaps the edge of the cliff is not so far off. In a way, we can turn away before we fall into the sea. And when I was on Bell Island in Newfoundland, some of these cliffs, like during like a fog, if you are not careful, you could just walk right off into the sea and be gone forever, which I think a lot of people have done in the past. So that's one of those cases where it's like suddenly the land could disappear beneath you and you have no idea what just happened. And so this is like a chance to turn away, to stop and wait for this fog to clear. So yeah, and then the moon trines with the sun. Somehow I think like now the circumstances in the plot line are going to be in more positive and supportive alignment. Moon is in this mature and determined Capricorn, while the sun is in a managerial and prepared Virgo. So what better time is it than now to get our things together, to go through the details, to figure out what is in our inventory, to come up with a plan, to make a list, to get all the piles of things that are adding up, go through them one at a time and tally up the numbers that we know where we stand in terms of our resources, energies, abilities, and willingness to see things through and to keep the story going. So I would suggest do things that you can sink your teeth into and get down to business, because this will reclaim some of the feelings of powerlessness we may have been having in our relationships now that Venus is in Scorpio, and in our missions now that Mars is in Libra. And at that same time, the moon's also going to be conjoining with Pluto. So I think this is a time to ask, what are we afraid of right now? How can we integrate that into where we are circumstantially, environmentally, and emotionally? This is a chance to get in touch with what it is we are afraid of, about the unknown, but the deeper, darker places that we often try to avoid. But then unless we shed light on them, often enough, grow denser and darker until they may explode. It's a very Pluto thing, exploding, because it gets denser and darker. So give yourself a moment to sit in this and allow these fears and cathartic feelings to emerge and release naturally. Release whatever is pent up inside, if you can, and in a way that illuminates things. So that's it for the moon's transits through Capricorn. And then it moves into Aquarius. So another energy shift, things become future focused, getting our emotions out of the way to present ourselves in a way that matches maybe the status quo or contrasts itself to the status quo. This is shifting away from the me and towards the decentralized presence, or vice versa. Seeing how we fit in or how we do not. And generally the insider-outsider paradigm. What is our position now that we went through all that change in the last 72 hours? We're becoming more emotional and attached to that position we are taking in terms of ourselves and the world around us, to ideas and to our opinions, to our overall place in this world. And simultaneously with that move into Aquarius, the moon just immediately trines to Mars. So I think this is generally a good thing for the most part. This is kind of feeling where we're at, seeing what is possible, doing what we can do in that context, regardless of whether or not it's going to cut or solve the problem in one foul swoop. This is at least seeing that we can get through this and there are solutions, even if they're not typically solutions we become accustomed to implementing in order to get the problem solved. So that's it for Thursday. So let's just move right into Friday. And the day opens up, as you can see, with a number of transits. So I'm going to start from the top with the sun's trine to Pluto. So I feel like this is it's an interesting transit, one that I haven't heard anyone address yet, but I kind of feel like this is that shining of that warm and intentional light onto those fears maybe that we had felt when Moon conjunct Pluto. The deeper, more intense things that we have had to feel out yesterday. Now we have a light that shines brightly onto that topic, onto that issue, onto that pent up, deeper and darker place or subject that needs to be addressed and brought into the light from a more supportive and benevolent and beneficial aspect. It's making an impression, scrutinizing those things from a place of support. So this is like a benevolent light that has the details in Virgo, trying to provide some sort of outer and understanding of the more fearful subjects in the world or in our lives that needs to be looked at with full clarity so that we can let it go and allow it to purge and purify and transcend beyond that Dionysian, secretive, and underworld matters that we think may be too dark to look at this time. But now we have the light and understanding to see it in truth. It's maybe a bit ugly at first or in shadow, but once we see it, we can shed compassion onto it. Sun is in Virgo and has been trying to figure out what is available for the future when there's not a lot left. So it's trying to look at this darker subject and to try and see what is available now to help bring a spiritual perspective on those topics. That the course we're taking includes these more troubling topics and fears, that we can take big fears, break them down by looking at them and take them on in smaller increments over time than in one big overwhelming mountain of fear. In a way, I kind of see this as dealing with those backlogged taxes, having a plan, sticking to it until the backlog is dealt with, and seeing that it was only scary because we didn't originally know how to deal with it from the get-go. Maybe you're getting audited and it feels really scary and you have to do that thing. But really, it's just a process. Nobody's going to get hurt. All right. So let's move on to the next thing. We've got this moon making that inferior square to Venus, just as it's conjoining with Saturn, followed by Venus's square to Saturn in the superior position. Like literally all seems to be happening just as the day is starting. So all that's going on just as the day starts here in Toronto, Canada, which I personally see probably as maybe the toughest day for Venus. And so for all things Venus ruled this week, and which we likely have been feeling getting emphasized since Venus moved into Scorpio last Friday on September 10th. I think this is also an important time to take notes and really to pay attention. This is the 7th degree of the fixed sign, especially Scorpio and Aquarius. This is going to be the degree where Mercury and Mars conjunct in November, exactly on 10th of November. And then they square, again, this Moon-Saturn conjunction. This is the follow-up square between Mars and Saturn from early January 2021 as well. That one that I'm talking about in November. So let's like bring up a chart that shows that actually. So we can see it. This is 10th of November. We can see that Mars is making the square to that Moon-Saturn conjunction, while it's also conjunct Mercury, and still under the beams in the sun. That said, Mars is in its own sign, so it's able to mitigate that intensity of the sun's heat and blindingness and invisibility. So it's like striking from an invisible place. And Mars is also in this sign. In this chart, which I'm casting from Toronto, Ontario, is also in the 6th house is joy. So Mars is in a very capable and dominant position over Saturn at this time, which is a big contrast from the last one. And I think the last square was when we had that insurrection to the White, not the White House, but in DC, there was the insurrection, and that's what happened during the last one in January. And this time Mars is in the superior position, while before Saturn was in superior position, was able to quell that insurrection. Now Mars is in superior position. So Mars is now taking a more dominant role in this conflict between personalities versus principles, where personalities now have the upper hand. They're more dominant. So I'm not looking forward to that, in my opinion, not looking forward. All right, back to the transits, back to the present. So let's look again. Let's look at this Venus-Saturn square. It means trouble for love, friendship, sexuality and sensuality, jealousy and envy, attraction and repulsion, enjoyment and disgust. So there's this lack making, setback producing, or even overcooling, because Saturn's this very cold place and it's like maybe frigid, or wet blanket making for Venus's ability to merge, bond, draw together, and bring harmony or balance. This is like running into a wall, saying no rather than yes to desires. This could be a rejections in general, a no to relationships, or even a loss as it relates to Venus-like matters, especially relationships. Still, this is partially temporary, something is changing in terms of Venus-like matters, and there will be a radical shift that's unstable and inconsistent later in the month when Venus makes the opposition to Uranus next week on September 23rd. So Venus is caught between these two forces, sandwiched between two poles, one being Saturn, which has to do with maturity, necessity, expectation, and longevity, as opposed to Uranus, which is something extreme, emancipating, avant-garde even, and novel. This could be finding oneself in this difficult decision-making process of having to choose between what is familiar and what is novel, between what we have already been planning and what has suddenly presented itself as a disrupting or inconsistent events. It could be that there is a difficult tension between how things have been going so far versus how we want to rewrite how things will go forward from this point on. But with Uranus, there's always uncertainty and instability to that mix. So although it may excite and bring some kind of instant gratification, it is unlikely to last, or at the very least, it is unlikely to go without drama, disruptions, and a breaking apart process that leaves what we had before in pieces, or very, very different in general. Still, until that opposition with Uranus perfects next week, most of this week, and is really about this sense of restriction, loss, impermanence, and feigned appearances as it pertains to Venus-related matters, relationships, love, aesthetics, etc. Bonding, basically. So like, I kind of see this like moving from a relationship to being single. That first phase of being single is not always comfortable or even pleasant experience. But then once that's dealt with, felt, and moved through, there's a liberating change that takes place, where one gets that big breath of fresh air in relationships, art, pleasure, or connection on some level. However, it's going to not be entirely comfortable, especially with Venus and Scorpio feeling especially vulnerable, defensive, and chaotic. That the structure, maturity, and stability of the old will suddenly feel like something we realize holds some sort of significance higher, and holds a significance that is like a higher level of attractiveness. But then now it's broken, or at the very least damaged. We're not entirely sure how to get back to it, or if it's even possible to salvage it. This is feeling fear and swimming out too deep deep into waters and how we relate and connect to others, because now we don't know if that mature and stable place is still available to us. Is the dock still there after the storm? We have to put that structure at risk and not feeling entirely good about it. So what do we do next? Now, I think it's important not to put too much emphasis on the negative aspects of this transit, but it's going to be uncomfortable for the time being. There are more positive transits down the road, some that will open things up, create an opportunity and flexibility, but perhaps not ones that feel so good, that are about relationship in that traditional sense, or that will be able to fulfill desires or needs down the road. They may be more about opening up opportunities that are not necessarily what will meet desires, but may meet this necessity. So like business connections rather than romantic connections, so to speak. So there you go. That's kind of that big Friday cluster. And let's just move the moon forward, is going to then square to Uranus. So maybe what was different before doesn't necessarily work this time, from the trine to the square. So when moon trine to Uranus, doing the opposite worked in that situation, but maybe it's not going to work this time. This is realizing that not all the same solutions are the right tool for different problems. Something is disrupting from a place we need things not to be disrupted from, but they are anyway, with that Uranus and Taurus there. So we have to try and accept that, or at least push through it or deal with it, because if we don't, it could become a bigger problem down the road. This is emotionally absorbing a blow from a radical change that forces you to pay attention, even though you're already paying attention to so much stuff already, with everything else going on. This could be that little wrench in the gears that you really didn't need. All right, and that's kind of it for Friday, so pace yourself. And let's just move into Saturday, September 18th. So first things first, we get that trine to Mercury. And yeah, moving forward into the remaining week, I think it's just good to say that it's pretty much just a lunar week from this point forward, as we get a sequential series of more manageable and supportive transits that helps us to integrate and accept what really has just happened, what is happening, that is changing, and that maybe is difficult to deal with, but that we have support and sympathetic places to turn to in order to deal with these larger, more difficult forces. This is getting some results from waiting and queuing, I think. And even though it's frustrating, we will get it to our time, and our time will come, and we will get to be able to get our piece of the pie as it comes. We're all in the same boat together. I think that's really what we need to remind ourselves here. So anyway, so moon trines Mercury and then moves right into that conjunction with Jupiter, which is great. This is a positive turn for saying something, connecting to a greater whole, for sending the message, for making the exchange to a goal that is bigger and have more longevity in success, and then the success of those exchanges. Now it's time to know your position in things, to say what that is, to exchange it between yourself and others, to have a sense of hope and optimism and where that's going and what it's doing. We're able to feel like the exchanges and messages we're making have substance, have support, are seen and heard, and they are doing it. They're going to be well received and actually do something. Rather than face setbacks and delays, they are met with a creative and sustaining order that is connected to a greater whole of belief and understanding, with that Jupiter conjunction, that is harmonious to the whole. And we can integrate not only in ourselves the message that's coming across, but also the sense that the cosmos around us is working in an order that, regardless of whether or not it makes sense, is in fact doing something and is going somewhere. We are part of that, and that the things we are doing are part of that greater whole. We now have all the points in order. We have our evidence. We have our message clearly laid out and we can express it, and it is received and it is accepted and it is considered in how it functions to that greater whole. We have our place to say it, to be someone who has integrity in our message. Still, I think just because we're getting that benefic Jupiter conjunction with the moon, Jupiter is all about truth, justice. So we have to be fair, honest, just, true, and pure in our message. Because if we're not, then this is not going to work as well or as long lasting as we want it to work. Jupiter is that cosmic judge and has finally given us the chance to come to the stand, to make our statement. So this is our opportunity to do the right thing, to say the things that comes from a place of wisdom, that is honest and integral, that provides a message of hope, support, and confirmation. This is using the opportunity to get our emotions out of the way, to vocalize, with moon still in Aquarius, get our emotions out of the way, and to vocalize what our position is in things and to be heard in that position. So make the most of it, really. Use this from a position of integrity and let those around you know that you know where you stand and you've waited your turn, and now you can let it be known that you're taking part in things in an integral and harmonious way. This is seeing that being patient actually pays off. And if I were going to do elections this week, I may still do it. I'm going to be in Montreal. I would say this is a great day to make an election. Probably Friday into Saturday, with the moon applying to the trine to Mercury, or separating from it and applying to the conjunction with Jupiter. So that's it for moon in Aquarius. Boom. So let's move into moon in Pisces. So we're still on Saturday. Moon moves into Pisces, another energy shift, this time about hope, faith, dreams, coming to terms with our limitations and letting go of the frustrations that comes with that. Acceptance and forgiveness, and becoming more buoyant in a humble and more true position that we're taking now that we've freed ourselves of the burdens of the last days, and getting through that conjunction with Jupiter that was released was worth it, and we can feel more emotionally convicted that there is salvation, there is light at the end of this tunnel. This is also now moving into those full moon vibes. The moon's going to make that full moon basically in a couple days. So this is feeling things getting ready to be released, to be culminated, to be seen fully in a way that helps us to know what decisions need to be made as we turn towards a closing of this lunar cycle. What can be and what can't be done, and have the decisions we made through these last 2 weeks helped us to get to a point where we can bring our intentions from this lunar cycle to fruition, to nurture them, to actualize them in the world. And in this, to actualize them in this place of vision and fantasy and hope and salvation of Pisces. So that kind of closes off Saturday. So let's just move right into Sunday, September 19th. First things first, you're not going to see the lines forming, but we have that square from the moon to the nodes, right? So 5 degrees Pisces, 5 degrees Sag, 5 degrees Gemini. So moon squares with the nodes. Now we're at this halfway point again. Each month we've been getting to this twice. The moon has gone through that contrast of things that simultaneously is increasing in light as the moon moved from the new moon to the full moon, and action while decreasing in ability and wanting to do things as it moved through that with that point with the south node, to have to balance between the desire to create and see our intentions manifest and the pull towards fantasy, detachment, letting go, and feeling generally melancholic. Now the moon is moving towards that culmination point of the Pisces full moon, while also steering towards the north node in Gemini, towards increasing, amplifying, getting hungrier and hungrier, feeling insatiable, that we don't have enough, we have to do more. And this will contrast with what the moon is doing in turn of its waning lunar phases, where we're attempting to consolidate, bring things to a close, see our intentions solidify and mature in order for us to close this chapter and open the next with the Libra new moon in October. So this is part of the feelings of fragmentation, of not being aligned with how things are increasing but decreasing at the same time. This is the challenge of balance right now, that we've recently had to deal with things while we wanted to just escape and live in the fantasy. Now it's like we want to close things up and not overwhelm ourselves, but more and more information and exchanges are increasing, and we have to accept that we have to deal with them. We have to deal with that because there's nothing we can do to stop it from coming. It's going to come regardless. So it's fortune based. It's about the moon. So then the moon's going to trine with Venus. And this is kind of a tricky one. Typically, trines are good. And I like it a lot, but Venus is still in Scorpio, and Venus does not necessarily feel comfortable. Venus is totally out of her element. Things are not bonding in usual ways. Balance is being found in things that typically are maybe disgusting rather than enjoyable. Venus is becoming more aware of the grotesque things and maybe in relationships and the pleasures of the everyday, that they are not maybe as pleasurable as one is used to. So as the moon does trine with Venus, this could be a bit of a danger that something we know is wrong, or something we know is not going to give us the pleasure that may come with something grotesque or disturbing is also going to be supporting us in some weird way. It's going to be demanding from us, or is going to be seducing us maybe. And as the moon is in Pisces on this low, but also a high from before the full moon, there could be a susceptibility to doing something we may regret later, or to accepting things that actually we don't feel comfortable with later down the road. This could be like taking that hookup call we've been ignoring all this time, only because we want to feel good, but instead of it helping, it only makes things worse. This is being a little too emotionally open to things that may harm us or that do not have our best interests at heart, because they are more concerned with filling some darker need of their own without considering the consequences. Maybe we're not enjoying anything at this moment, and there is room to feel, and we need to feel them, being with the moon in Pisces. But then we could become too open and too susceptible to those darker needs and feelings that could potentially bring problems with Venus and Scorpio. My suggestion would be to go to a safe space where you can connect to others who are also feeling out of step with their desires and needs not being met. Share about it, hear one another, be open to creating space for those inner troubles to be heard and release them together, rather than going out, getting a hookup or something because it feels good and then regretting it later. Connect with a community of people who are having a tough time and need you as much as you need them to get back on their feet and deal with it together. So that's it for Sunday, really. And let's just move on into Monday. And so the moon's still in Pisces. We're going to close this week off with the moon's continued transit through Pisces and make some harmonious aspects to the outer planets, specifically to Pluto and Uranus, but then also the conjunction Neptune. So we're seeing how we can bring rebalance to things if we allow ourselves to nurture where we're feeling rather than acting out on them because we're going to get immediate sense of pleasure and desire fulfillment. This is about seeing that the immediate it's not always about immediate solutions. We can feel things out. We can allow ourselves to feel. And I think with the sextile to Uranus, it's kind of like adjusting maybe to that sudden disruptions from before, or those sudden innovations on some level, that we can adjust from them rather than be disrupted by them. And then with the sextile to Pluto, it's like, again, I think somehow connecting to those fears or releasing something, pent up releasing, getting that out. But mostly I'm going to focus now on that conjunction to Neptune. So there's definitely going to be confusing things going on. This is not going to be, you're not going to have any illusions about that, even though it's all illusions. So things that are normally working and helping are not necessarily helping, which is strange. But now we're there. in the thick of these feelings, in the thick of these strange, otherworldly, and intangible substances of reality. So I would suggest just literally feel it, you know what I mean? Just be in it, integrate that, allow the density of this fog or confusion to just roll over, you know. Like what's beautiful about being in dense fog is you can actually feel it in your skin. You can feel it moving, and it's really a profound feeling because you're just like completely covered it and you're breathing it in too. You can actually feel it in your lungs. So what does that fog feel like as it moves through you? It's not just moving, you know, over you and around you, it's moving through you. So what does that feel like? It's not going to be all clear. Nothing is bringing clarity exactly at this time. And you can either just delve deeper and deeper into delusions, or you can accept that things are under some sort of false veil right now and accept that this is an illusion of sorts. And delusion, it's even a delusion of sorts. You know, that's I think the first step to enlightenment is realizing that, you know, everything's delusion. And the environment we're in and the story that's been playing out so far is not entirely the story at large, because that new moon started with the opposition to Neptune. We can only accept that, you know, there is reality out there, that reality is real, that we're in it, regardless of if we understand it or not. And perhaps we can even see, as they describe in Zen, this ox of enlightenment. We get to see the tracks. Maybe we don't see the ox, we don't realize what it looks like or have a taste of it, as they say, but we can see that the tracks are there, that this path is real, that the truth is out there, like the X-Files. And for now, we just have to be in the deepness of this heavy yearning for something more than the mundane. So it's a trip. So maybe it's time to just trip out. All right, that's it for this week's astrology, everybody. I guess it's been a long one, but there's some big stuff going on this week, and there's a lot of big changes and, you know, challenges. So I thought it was important to go through that. Take with it as you will. Next week, we have the full moon in Pisces, basically opening up the week. Talked a bit about it already a little bit, but basically, you know, culmination and revealing in Pisces, getting into the reality of things being pretty outside of the norm, and what we have been thinking and initially reality is about is not really how it's going to be going. So there's going to be a lot of fantasy, maybe a lot of weird news coming out, things like that. And I think it's about figuring out how to adapt to the power of taking things more just one day at a time, just for today position. Because if we're constantly just out there in the what if land, we're not experiencing where we are. We're not really enjoying our lives. So, you know, live it. Then we get that Mercury trine to Jupiter, probably the most positive thing next week. And then Venus opposite to Uranus. Talked a bit about that already, but yeah, that's going to be weird. And then Mars is trine to Saturn. Not sure if that's a good thing or not yet. Let's see. And then Mercury stations retrograde right at the end of the week. So that's it for this week, everybody. Thanks always for tuning in. I really hope that these videos are going to go a long way for you through the week to help you navigate this karmic weather forecasts. As always, thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and all your support. If you think this video is going to help you or anyone else, please consider sharing it. You know, getting my work out there goes a really long way, and I would love for it to get out there more. If you'd like to book a consultation with me, I'm still available to do that, even though I'm traveling. Just go to my website and schedule in a consultation. It's all in the description box below. All right, guys, that's it from me over in Toronto, Canada. I'm going to wish you guys all the best. Good luck this week. Keep calm. It's all going to be okay. Easy does it. I'll see you next week. Keep coming back. Bye for now.